Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to be talking today about The Warrior Prophet, which is book 2 in the Prince of Nothing trilogy by R. Scott Bakker. We did a chat about book 1, The Darkness That Comes Before, over on Philip's channel. So if you want to hear thoughts on that book, go check out that video. I'll link it down below. But here I am with my group again for R. Scott Bakker. So here with me, we have Dr. Chase, or Professor Fantasy, Dr. Fantasy.
I'll answer to any of those,
Or what
John.
is it? Mine hair. What is it that Matt calls you?
Herr Dr. Professor.
There you go. And you even said
Fantasy.
the right accent.
I
So,
do detect some kind of power creep there. Dr. Chase is gathering titles.
yeah. I just call him Philip, but Philip.
Yeah, please call me Philip. Yeah.
And then we have the wonderful Jimmy Nuts from the Fantasy Network.
Howdy.
How's it going?
Good to be here. This is one of my favorite Baker books, and definitely one that has some weird stuff in it, which I'm always down for weird. So I'm pumped to see what y'all thought about it.
Exciting. And then we also have the Raf Bluetoxt. I can't quite say it the way you do, Philip, but Raf.
Hey.
How's it going?
I'm good, I think. I finished it like 3 hours ago, so I'm well prepared.
And you listen to it on audio. How fast on audio speed do you listen to, Raf? I'm just curious.
2.1.
Is it what? 3.1?
2.1.
2.1?
God, 3.1 is insane. I couldn't do that.
Yeah. Goodness.
Wow.
Yeah. And what is the narrator? Do you like the narrator for this audiobook?
I'm okay with him, but I don't care that much for different audiobook narrators. I think that's one of those things. A lot of people are like, I like this audiobook narrator, and otherwise like, yeah, I don't think that's something you can do, because voices are such a personal thing in a way. It's like you can't necessarily say this is a good audiobook narrator, because if their voice doesn't vibe with you, you have no chance. And on the other hand, I don't have that much of a choice, so I've listened to stuff that is really badly recorded just so I can have it. So I don't care that much, but it's proficient. It's well done. There's not, no flaws in the audio. So I'm good.
Yeah, nice. All right. And so I think we're going to start off just talking about overall experience with this book, what your experience was. I know Jimmy already mentioned it as a favorite, but I'll go start with Philip first, and tell us your experience with The Warrior Prophet.
So I finished reading it not this morning like Raf, but I did finish it yesterday. And so it's still a bit fresh for me. I'm still deeply impressed by Baker's writing. I think he's a very gifted writer, and I enjoy his inclusion of philosophical themes in this story. I think it's brilliant, some of the stuff he does, and I appreciate the fact that he has me thinking a lot as I'm reading these books. So I'm really grateful for that. There are some things too that, and I said from the beginning, that I was kind of hoping there would be a little tiny weeny teeny bit of hope in here for humanity. maybe we have some kind of and this could be completely delusional on my part, but maybe we have some teeny weeny bit of free will, or some, nah, I guess not. Raph is shaking his head. Yeah, so I think there is a bleakness to this that I'm cool with it, because I believe I love to read various kinds of stories. Is it my favorite kind of story? Is it the type that I am most comfortable with? No, it's not. I mean, it's challenging for me, because there are certain things in here that it's very bleak. The treatment of sexuality and sex and women and that sort of thing is still something I'm wrestling with at the moment. And so I'm kind of I'm interested in talking that out with you guys to see, what insights you can help me see. And but it is something that I am definitely a wee bit uncomfortable with, just kind of and we'll get into more details later, but there are some things that Baker does that I'm a little bit, when it comes to, we talked about this before with the women, particularly, but I don't know if we talked a lot about his portrayal of the the consults and some of their little pets and such, and their proclivities. So that's become much more prominent in this one. So we can talk about that later, but overall, I think I'm just deeply impressed. I'm very happy to be reading this series. It's something that I've long wanted to have under my belt. And I think that I'm very grateful to everybody who suggested that I read the series, because it's incredible and it's very thought-provoking.
Yeah, well said. All right, and Jimmy, you said this is a favorite of yours and that you love the weird. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the consult in itself is just a pretty bizarre concept. One of the things I wasn't able to reread this before this chat, so I have to be very careful with the kind of information that I leak out here. So I'll probably take tips from you guys to know what details have been dropped yet. But the Battle of Mengele is absolutely fantastic. And the thing that I really enjoyed about this book, and whenever I think about it, and kind of reflecting on it, is the fact that we're seeing a holy war that is becoming an antagonist in itself, and Bakker plays with that with a switch of perspectives. Whenever we actually see battles going on and going to an omniscient bird's eye view, that perspective is omniscient, but it's also the holy wars perspective, which I think is really, really cool. And we're seeing a conquest, but we're seeing a conquest within a conquest, which is the warrior prophet, which is the combination of two archetypes coming together. And Kellis is also in himself a Dunyain now coming together with a Kamian, who is a teacher, or as Bakker describes, a father. To teach is to be a father. And very interesting father-son dynamic there. But the warrior prophet, Dunyain and Gnosis, just a lot of layers to that. And I think that the conquest of Kellis within the Holy War is actually more fascinating than the Holy War itself. And it makes you wonder if you could take yours for a second and think about yourself within the context of this time period in Urwa. Would you be swept off your feet by Kellis? Would Kellis be influencing you whenever you see a very intense religious experience happen that is so in some way nebulous, but also really impactful in the way that it's written? But I think it is left kind of abstract on purpose to kind of reflect the idea of, I think even people who were there at circumfixion would also not understand what they were seeing or know what they were seeing. And we need to do more than see, we need to witness, as Kellis says in this as well. So I think that there's like a lot of stuff that kind of comes circling, like a back around, and maybe even spiraling down into deeper, more personal level things, especially with Kellis and Akamian, that I really, really enjoy. So that's probably why it's my favorite. Also, there's things that are set up in this book that pay off in like book 3 of the next series. It's actually a little insane to think about. So it's a lot of fun. Cool. Well, maybe fun's not the word. Yeah, it's something to think about, I guess.
Yeah. And Raph, we'd love to hear your thoughts now.
I found it fairly entertaining. It's a simple book, I think, structure-wise, because what you see is this one ongoing narrative. It follows the Holy War on its way to, I guess, Arwar's Antioch or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the narrative is just one group doing one thing, whereas in the first book, Darkness That Comes Before, we had all these different characters that are all going to sailing to Byzantium, as a certain Irish nationalist once sang. And I feel that makes it easy to follow, and it's way more action-packed. We have way more, action, I guess. And I would agree with Jimmy that the battle at Mengele is really well written and really impressive. Although I feel like the beginning of it is way more impressive than the actual battle. But I'm not quite sure I buy his like bird's eye view, because there is something to that, but it also leaves a distance when it comes to all the atrocities of war, because through that bird's eye view, there's a psychic distance between me as the reader and the things happening on the ground. It's like, you just list off a bunch of atrocities here, but I don't care about them so much because I'm too far away. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Beyond that, I do agree with the things that Philip said about the sexuality stuff. That's, I don't know, man, in a lot of ways. And I do have all kinds of issues still with the religion part, because for me it doesn't work. I still feel, apart from like, Bakker is good at describing the effects, but I don't think he can ever reach like the core of a religious experience, because Bakker is too skeptical of those existing, and that's sort of what where this book kind of always breaks down for me, is like, yeah, you describe how people are suddenly awed by colors, but you can never actually, we never get that like an inside perspective of anyone except Survey, who is, well, not a good character. So I have issues with that, because it still feels like you're describing just the effects of a religious experience without the essence, I think. And I do at this point think that R. Scott Bakker is incapable of ever, reaching the essence of a religious experience.
Yeah, he does kind of, I think, dance around it a bit. And you do have characters like Gotian, for example, who's the leader of
The Grandmaster of the
Grandmaster
Knights, yeah,
of the Shriel Knights, yeah, who appears to me to be a true believer, but he's not a main character. We don't even ever really get his perspective.
exactly.
You do have, I think you mentioned Serway, who is a true believer of a different sort, because she, to the degree, are we doing spoilers yet, or are we?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we're going
for sure.
spoilers.
Full spoiler. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry. No.
yeah.
I mean, this is book 2 in the series. I feel at this point we can just go full spoilers, because
so Serway increasingly becomes a true believer in Kelhus, and to the extent that she utters heresy and gets her throat cut for it, she's a sad character to me, and that's part of what makes me uncomfortable too with Kelhus, is how, and I think this is intentional on Bakker's part, completely intentional. When it comes to Kelhus, I don't think we're supposed to like this guy. I don't think he's really a heroic character at all. He's a creepy, manipulative. Yes, I mean, he's pretty kick-ass. I mean, he's pretty awesome in combat, but I'm not impressed with his dodging arrows and everything else, because I don't like the guy. I don't like what he did to Serway, using her body essentially to get to, I mean, he does that to pretty much everybody. So in a way, Nair has the right view of Kelhus, right?
Nair is a very interesting lens in a world that is starting to be swept up. Continue, Philip. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, I think you're right. Nair is an intriguing character, but my main point is that I think that Raph is essentially right about the religious or lack of depth when it comes to exploring actual religious zealotry. And we do get it much more in this book, though, than in the previous. He definitely tries to do more of it in this book, but I think he's definitely more interested in the cynical characters. Your Acamians, right? Who has a constant crisis of faith. This guy has. I mean, he's a far more, I think, compelling, interesting character. Bakker is probably one of his best characters, in my opinion. Is Acamian.
Yeah, Acamian is definitely. He's definitely my favorite character so far, and I think the doubt kind of thing is something that he's better at describing.
Yeah. He's really good at that.
For me, like it feels the way he's describing this, and I can't shake it. There is this like 2000s internet atheist edgelord thing going on, where it's like, religious people are all kind of, not as smart as other people, and smart people like Kelhus can manipulate people that are, not as intelligent, not as well educated, or whatever. There is that feeling of arrogance going on there, which I personally don't like. And we're not supposed to like Kelhus, but on the other hand, I don't think we're to like these other people that fall for him, because it's sort of also their fault.
Right.
And that's something that just like rubs me the wrong way.
Well, you guys are talking a lot about faith and believers and stuff. How do you all feel about Proyas?
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah. He's the example we gave last time of the closest
And
the
you're going to get
closest.
more and more of him.
We
And
do.
he-
You're right. Yeah.
and he's a true
Proyas.
believer for sure.
Yep, yep, and that's a good point. I think Proyas is probably exhibit A of because unlike Gotian, we really do get Proyas's perspective.
But we rarely get his perspective on like the actual religion. And that's something that I find interesting because we don't know what those guys believe. Like we get like one or two quotes from that Tusk, which are just, slightly garbled Bible quotes. And that's it. We don't get any, we don't know what they're believing. Apparently there's a bunch of different gods, but maybe they're just aspects of the same God. I don't know. And that makes it very difficult.
Yeah,
At least for me.
I think in Rithi religion, which is an analog to Christianity,
Yeah.
Bakker is exploring. In Christianity, you have the Trinity, right?
Yeah.
Which is multiple gods in one God. It's one God, really, in Christianity. But if, let's say, you're a Muslim, you might say, wait, no, you actually have three gods there. And you have all these saints, too, depending on which branch of Christianity you belong to. And they're pretty close to gods in some ways. So, in fact, many of them were former gods, so that, to me, is, I think, it would be awkward for him to explain to the reader, here's what this faith is all about, and here's what we believe. I mean, it would be a tough thing to insert into the narrative. I think he's basically probably relying on the reader's knowledge of medieval Crusade age Christianity to sort of get the vibe and insert, that sort of thing there.
And that's one of my problems I have with this, because I don't know about you guys. Have you ever, studied the Crusades and Crusade era theology?
Yeah.
No,
Oh, yeah.
I have not.
I haven't either. Honestly, my world.
Well, I did some. I'm far from being an expert. I just looked at like heresy paragraphs and stuff in, canon law at the time. But here's the point: it's like most people have a very, very skewed image of the Crusades in all kinds of ways, and by basically making the reader do all the heavy lifting there. Bakker leaves his book open, like, to all kinds of ideas, and I find that slightly troubling with something as loaded as the Crusades. I mean, it's fine in a way, but like his image of the Crusades, the way he's portraying it so far, reminds me of, very cartoonish images. I'm just waiting for that scene with, like, the blood up to their ankles and stuff like that. I'm just waiting for that scene to show up, and I assume it'll happen in the next book if they reach the sort of Jerusalem. But
so, do you feel like it necessarily is a commentary on what actually happened, or is it just inspiring new events to be turned up to 10?
How do you mean that?
Well, meaning that taking some sort of inspiration from the Crusades, like, you're saying, well, it's not like a great representation, it's cartoonish, but like maybe that is the intent in this world, meaning that he's just taking the inspiration from it, not necessarily telling you exactly what happened in the Crusades or how he feels about it necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of my point, right? I mean, obviously he's not talking about our Crusades per se, because then he would have just written a historical novel or a historical, popular historiography or something like that. He's obviously not doing that. He's taking what he thinks or what he wants as like the essence or the key things of the Crusades, and he's taking those and lifting those, taking him into his world to make some sort of point, because this is definitely a theme-driven book, right? So he's making a point, and his point seems to be crusading people be mad or greedy, and you can take that over if you're smarter than anyone else. And I'm not sure if that's a message I like.
I feel like also there is something to say about, belief, but there's also a lot of commentary, and I would almost say equal part in desire of a person's heart. Yeah. And belief and desire are very different, but I believe they're equally powerful, especially whenever it's belonging to a collective. Yeah, it's the steering of that collective, and I believe he's trying to, make a point of how that can be perverted from the inside out. And also there's the whole scope of this religious war about who's the enemy. But as the reader, we know that the real enemy here is the Inquiry and the Unholy Consult. Yeah, those are the real, enemies here. And I think it, barring all the details, I think it's at least interesting to see it in a regards that these people are fighting against each other, have all these powers. Whenever, if they were allies against this other bigger enemy, it would actually end up being a much better thing for humanity.
Mhm.
So I think that's
Yeah.
kind of like the collective mindset is definitely something that he's playing with.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that it's exclusively about belief. I think it's also about desire, like Saban wanting more land for himself. Saban doesn't necessarily care.
Yeah. That's what I meant by
Yeah.
greed.
Seldom. Yeah, no, I
Uh,
was going to say something similar, Jimmy. I think you said it a bit better than I would have, but
Mhm.
I was going to say that the subject isn't maybe so much belief or faith as it is doubt. And so,
I
and
think
that's fine.
there's
You know, that's a thing you can explore.
yeah.
And even Proyas has his doubts, like, did I do the right thing? Did I, you know, with the Camion, did I do
Yeah.
the right thing with Zin, with Zinimus? You know, he's riddled with guilt because of what he does with them, and you see some cracks in his facade of, you know, just strong faith there, and he kind of lurches back to that. But you know, I think that Bakker seems to be more interested in doubt than he is in belief. I think.
Oh yeah, definitely,
overall.
definitely. I think there was one scene that I found very powerful, and I wish he would have gone down that road. And that's an Esmenet scene when she's remembering her time as a prostitute in Sumna, and talking about all those poor or not, not nobility pilgrims coming to Sumna and basically falling apart because they realize that it's not actually, bringing them the salvation they were yearning for. And that was probably the closest he ever got to like the actual phenomenon of faith or belief in a medieval context. Although once again, I mean, he doesn't explore it further. Maybe it's because it comes across as like everyone, making the pilgrimage to Sumna, goes there, is disappointed, and then goes and spends all his remaining money on a prostitute. And when we look at like how medieval pilgrimages work, we should expect, for a lot of people to actually, find fulfillment in their pilgrimage in a way. And he kind of does not give that. There is no positive image of faith in these books, which I find interesting when you take a medieval world or pseudo medieval world and turn it into something. And that's what I mean when I said like I don't think he's capable of doing that, because for him religion is a psychological phenomenon, one that can be manipulated by someone who's in possession of more knowledge and abilities to manipulate psychologies of other people. And I'm not quite sure if religion is just a psychological phenomenon that can be manipulated that way. I mean, you can see how Kellis is basically building a cult, right? And he does that with psychological detail when he goes like, when you see how Kellis is manipulating people in all kinds of ways, is slowly separating Esmenet from Akamian to then take her over and so forth. That's something you can see in like how cults operate. And he's doing that fairly well because Bakker knows his psychology, but I don't think he understands faith. I don't think he understands belief, which he can't, because for him it's not real. It's just a psychological phenomenon.
Yeah.
God, I can't believe I'm defending religion here.
Yeah.
Pope Raph.
Devout Pentecostal Raph.
I'm baptized a Catholic.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
I don't
shows.
know. No, I just feel that we should take faith seriously, and there's a sincerity in faith that is lacking in these books, because apart from say Proyas and possibly the Grand Master, we never see like sincere faith. And Proyas is probably the best person because we see his doubts, and sincere faith should be always fighting with those doubts in a way.
Yep.
So zooming out from like religion, would you all say that it's a fundamental human trait to belong to something outside of ourselves, something that is bigger than the I?
Yeah, I think so. We're social creatures for sure. And we also are self-aware enough to be afraid of death. And I think that religion is one part of religion. It's not everything, but one part of religion is a way that we can wrestle with death to feel some comfort, to feel some sense of meaning and belonging. So most definitely. So affirmative to your question, Jimmy. Yeah.
Joanna, what do you think? I haven't heard you talk about
Yeah,
Book
I have a
2
lot of thoughts. So first of all, I want to go back, if that's okay, before I answer your question.
Yeah, sorry.
Because I love the question you were posing before about how this is, because for me, I am not the most knowledgeable about the Crusades. I'm just not. I'm not the most knowledgeable about that era in history, but at the same time, I understand this is very much influenced by that, and I probably should take the time to go ahead and research that more. At the same time, I guess I gave Bakker some leeway, given that this is fantasy and not historical fiction.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's okay and appropriate in my mind for him to just take a vibe of that, an interpretation, reinterpretation of that, and not try to make it accurate to that time period. And at the same time, I totally validate what you're saying, Raph, about because I am trying to go through my mind and think of instances where we get that depiction of faith that you're talking about. And I too was baptized Catholic. I went to Catholic school growing up. And so I also find that is a bit hard for me to find. I think, I know we talked about this in the previous discussion about how he does seem to zoom in more on cynical characters. And in the case of Serway, I think that she is definitely a much more of a believer. And at the same time, she's not as complex a character, I would say.
That's true.
And yet I will say I was very impressed with Proyas, because Proyas is very religious, and I did, you know, and now that you're bringing up this critique, Raph, I am thinking I would like to get more insight into the faith perspective, even from Proyas, but I was impressed, and I know he took the tip from Nair. I was impressed that he resisted Kellis at the end.
Yeah.
Impressed. Like that was
Very
a
important
twist I did not see coming, because I thought that Kellis was just going to get the upper hand on every single person in this story, and he didn't on Proyas. He tried to manipulate Proyas, and it didn't work, and I thought that was cool. But yeah, and then back to your question, Jimmy. I'm sorry, what was it?
Oh, I just, is it fundamental to the human experience to belong to something that is greater than yourself?
Yes, I would say yes to this. And this is actually one of the things I really loved about the zoomed out perspective on the war. I actually think there were a couple of moments where we were boots on the ground in the battlefield. I think I recall that, but I do see what you mean. There's a lot of zoomed out perspectives as well. And interesting things like mastodon stampedes and just like chaotic things. I love it though. I love the songs and the banners flying, and there's just so much energy in the air. The way he brings up that energy, the rage and the collective energy, which can be seen as emotional contagion, and in itself almost becomes an energy and mind of its own, kind of like a mob mentality.
Yep.
But there's an adrenaline that's contagious throughout that. And I think it's really interesting, because yesterday I was in a discussion on my channel. It kind of led to a discussion on violence in fantasy and about battle scenes, because I was saying that I love a good battle scene, and does that make me a bad person? Was my question about that. And what was great about that conversation is it got me to think about what it is about battle scenes I really enjoy. And I think what I love about a good battle scene is that if I'm in a good battle scene in a book, it makes me feel really small, especially if I'm really immersed and I'm seeing, especially if the author incorporates just hordes of people and weapons and chaos and energy and emotions and landscape and sky. I think there's something about that that makes me feel vulnerable and small and alive. And yet at the same time, especially when you have two sides clashing with one another, there is a sense of belonging. There is a sense of my side versus the other side. And in fantasy, especially, I think we often see it as good versus evil, or we're rooting for this side and not rooting for the other side. And yes, there are series that twist that, like Malazan, but at the same time, I think that we get an energy off that sometimes. And sometimes it's like an adrenaline pumping energy, kind of like jumping in a mosh pit or, whatever. And, and at the same time, I thought that what I love about this book is I feel like he does a good job of describing those things and at the same time critiquing it. At the same time, showing you that this is kind of ugly. It is ugly.
Yeah. I think you're right, and I think that's sort of what I really enjoyed about the scene, and like the beginning of the Battle of Mengeda, where you have that whole idea of when they're all standing there and beating their shields and singing that song, and maybe the audiobook helps because the narrator's actually singing that that four line verse they're always singing. It's like a warring we have come, a reaping we will work. When the day is done, in our eyes the God will lurk. And he's singing that, and because he repeats those lines again and again and again, it really drives home that there is, like, the army is like a beast. It's an entity at this point. It's no longer what Jimmy said earlier, that the Holy War is a character at that point. The army is a character on its own. People have given up their individuality to belong to this larger thing that has like a will of its own. And I think he does that. He does that like extremely well. It kind of reminded me in a way of one scene in Malazan, in, I think it's in The Crippled God. And I don't want to, spoil stuff, but there's this one scene where you have this army walking through like the forest and beating their shields, and you know what I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting to see that dynamic when suddenly, like this group spirit kind of takes over, a group of people, and I think he captures that in a fantastic way. I just wish there would be more of that.
Yeah.
Because when he
death swirled down, he uses that line a few
Very
times.
Homerific, right?
Yeah.
Which I didn't know that until after. So I actually, I went in my review, I went, he keeps repeating this line, and I'm about sick of it. People were like, "Oh, you're an idiot." That's Homer. I was like, "Oh, oh."
So he's taking an epic stance
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, very deliberately. And moving out. He does have, Joanna is right. I think there are a few moments of combat where we do zoom in a bit, like Calhus fighting against the little wiggly face things.
What about Saban?
Calhus never captures me.
Through the sky, and that scene where he's like standing, he basically becomes invincible in some sense during battle, or I got the impression that he seemed to get some sort of power from learning from Nair about battle.
Yes.
There was a big, huge turn of events there. But the other thing too, I think one scene that also stuck with me was the scene where he's with a commune and they are on the ziggurat. Am I saying that word right?
Yeah, sure. Who knows?
Ziggurat.
So, like,
we won't judge you.
What?
We won't judge you. I have no idea how to say it.
Oh, I had to look that up. But basically these like pyramids, and the idea was that these people had built these pyramids to get up to the top, to get up to God. And so I feel like a lot of the commentary on faith and religion that I feel through the book seem to be more in the history of the world than the forefront of the current present day perspective. So
which is interesting when it's still like a holy war, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I thought that was, I mean, and it was neat, the ziggurat though, because it was a symbol. It felt like a symbol in the book of people building this pyramid to get to a god. And the idea was that there's like nothing at the top, and that is this big delusion. And it was,
well, I mean, that is sort of like the Tower of Babel kind of story.
Yeah.
I wonder if like Bakker has ever read Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson, because Stevenson obviously talks about Mesopotamia in his book a lot. Well, mostly about Sumer, and that's exactly the idea of like when they're talking about Babel is like a tower topped with the heavens, and he makes a point there because Stevenson likes to cite like archaeological texts. Like what that actually means is that there is the god's house is on top of that ziggurat, and that means it is topped with the heavens because the heavens happen on top of that pyramid. And I was just wondering if Bakker had read Snow Crash, or the same sources that Neil
I
Stephenson read.
believe he did. I think I remember reading an interview where he said he really liked Snow Crash.
Yeah, I can believe him loving Snow Crash with the entire premise of, you know, people programming other people's minds. That feels like something that Baker would be really in love with.
I actually really appreciated too in this book some of the tragic elements that happened. Now, I didn't even talk about my reading experience of this book. So I did find it pretty fascinating overall, but I did find it was hard towards the end. Like it was so dark throughout. It was so dark, but the tragic elements in this shame, the way he uses shame in this book and lust and shame and secrecy, especially because like shame becomes so much stronger with people being having secrecy, and at the same time there's a love behind it too. I don't know, it just felt like one huge tragedy. Her whole entire relationship with Akamian
Yeah.
felt so tragic on so many levels. Like the fact that they finally find happiness with each other, and then it's like they are struggling to find this happiness within the midst of an apocalypse, then all this impending doom. And then I actually messaged Jimmy because I was like, did I read this right? Did Saraway rape? She raped Akamian.
Yeah.
Yeah, female rape.
Seduce, rape, I guess. Yeah.
No, it's rape.
Well, it's certainly non-consensual sex. I guess that's what we should call it. And she did that on the order of
Saraway did it
Kellis.
on the order of Kelhus. Don't
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Kellis moves in on
thinks
Esme here.
and she thinks it's Kellis too, which is the weird thing.
I mean, that's what I meant earlier when I said like Kellis is definitely using cult practices here when he's basically deliberately isolating people so he can then move in on them. That's what he's doing there.
Yeah.
Poor Akamian, he's like a super sad Gandalf, you know. I mean, he's
Akamian, yeah.
He can't get a break, the guy. I mean, the most pathetic scene in the whole thing, even more so than when he's tortured and he's trying to get out of the Scarlet Spire's hideout there, and all that's horrible. But the worst part for me was when he came back to be with, you know, die with his friends, and he's like thinking about Esme the whole time, and it's going to be so great, I'm going to embrace her, we're going to make love, it's going to be, and he finally he's thinking about jokes he's going to tell, and maybe I shouldn't tell the joke, you know. And then he finally gets there and she's like, I'm preggers, sorry. And he's like trying to tell his joke, and he's like, ha ha ha, you know, next time, you know.
But although, like, here's the thing, Philip, or like all of you, is like, that's when you just say like a super sad Gandalf, because I get the Gandalf vibes, but there's that scene when he escapes from the prison, right, and he fights the demon. Did that remind you of Gandalf's fight with the Balrog, the way it's described?
Sure.
I think it's on purpose too.
I feel so too.
I didn't think about it when I read it, but now that you pointed out, but I have to say I love the Wadu doll. Is that how you call it? Wait,
Dude, the doll coming out.
The doll is really cool.
So
this
metal.
little blade hand.
It's so metal. He does
like
horror
the doll.
very well.
I love that. I just thought that was the coolest.
And I have like another question, especially for you, Philip. But the scene with Kelhus hanging off the tree for several days and then gaining the knowledge of the thousandfold thought, does that give you Odin vibes?
Odin vibes, hanging from the
tree and gaining
Yggdrasil.
Yeah.
It gives, of course, obvious Christ vibes, the crucifixion, and they even have, instead of the crucifix on the banner, they have
you have them on the circle.
Circumfix.
Circumfix.
Yeah.
And of course, maybe a bit of Buddhist vibes there too, with the
Buddha
Buddha
tree,
meditating beneath the tree and awakening and all of that. So a bit of all of that wrapped up together, I would say.
I think for me, it was mostly Odin vibes, because hanging on that tree and gaining, and he gains that knowledge of the outside, and I'm like, oh, that's very Odin-esque.
The outside is something to take note of in this series, and so obviously, like, the circumfix is a religious experience for a lot of people who are watching this thing happen, and he comes back, and then Kamiya comes back, and things have changed completely, and this is one of the major things. But my question, and I don't have an answer for you, but something to keep, like, you know, maybe to ponder is, well, we know that, all these other people watching had a religious experience. What experience did Kellis have? Because he
Oh.
weeps. He weeps. And it's really the first time we see him show human emotion.
Yeah.
So what happened to him on that tree? What happened in the outside?
I think he saw the no god, right? I mean,
He
isn't
did.
that like
He
we
has
get his
images of the no
perspective?
god. Yeah.
He has images of the no god, and
I think it's
Yeah.
also important that he's on there, not alone, but with Serway,
Mhm.
and he is bound to her.
but that's an interesting question because it's like, does Callus actually care for Serway after all? Because
Yeah.
up to that point, it feels like he's just using her
Yes.
to manipulate
we-
other people.
Well,
We definitely saw a moment when he's like, "Oh, what is this?" And it's not with Serway, it's actually with Esmenet. But he has this moment where he's, "Oh, wait, my heart rate is increasing. Oh, I'm sweaty. I actually think I might dig her, you know?" So he has that moment, and obviously, so he's capable of
Mhm.
human emotions and attachments. And maybe I think that it's significant that he's up there with Serway, and I think the fact of the matter is they become a unit in a sense. I mean, when he holds up the heart, he's holding up her heart, and it's
Yeah.
confused deliberately with his own heart. It's like he's holding up his own heart, but it's actually her heart.
Yeah.
There's a kind of union that happens between them there, even though she's. It's like they're a yin yang up there too, because she's dead, he's alive, you know.
Yeah.
So
There's certainly
imagery
that.
of him blowing the fly away from her mouth.
face, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that
think-
really got to me.
Mhm.
I think though he's also saying, "Father, give her breath," or he's begging his father.
And he's talking to his father, which is very like the crucifixion too, right? With
Yeah.
Christ on the
Yeah.
cross, you know.
Yeah, there's certainly that. One thing that I found interesting is that several people, from some point onwards, it gets mentioned that he has like the halos on his hands, which is apparently what Inri Sejanus also had. So he does, when they're camping out in those ruins, when Sarsalis and Sorbonne show up, and he describes the mosaic on the floor, and he's like, and that's the first time he mentions that Inri Sejanus apparently has not halos on his head, but like not a halo on his head, but halos around his hands. And then later on, Survey sees them, which doesn't surprise me much, but other people as well. Like in situations where Survey is not there, people talk about like the halos around his hands. And I'm like, are they real? Or are they imagined because all those people are already too far gone into his like influence in a way? Also, is Esmenet, how much of Mary Magdalene is in Esmenet with that whole idea
so
of,
much,
right, with the whole prostitute kind of thing, and
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of speculation that she was in fact some people, this is of course not orthodox, but that she was a lover of Jesus.
I know. So and I was like, I
There's
see that
idea
part.
that she's a lover of Jesus, but it's also that Jesus absolves her whore or harlot identity. And in this case, that was the case with Kellis. He just basically has a conversation with her and she feels purified or feels like, and then they have sex, which I was like, I kind of didn't think that needed to happen, but I guess it's
well, I think it needed to happen because the point is that he's manipulating her.
It's a very cult thing to do. It's actually, I would argue that it's opposite of Jesus, and that may be a good distinction. Is I think we know. I don't know. Do we know that Kellis isn't supernatural? Like, I don't know. And I finished the series, and I'm like, I don't know.
I mean, that's a good question. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why I don't. When you talked earlier about like his like action scenes when he's dodging arrows and stuff like that, for me, Kellis is just a little bit too much of an anime character. If that makes sense.
That is a common complaint about this series. People feel like Kellis is a little overpowered. That is
maybe it's just because he always has this huge sword behind him as well. I'm like, I don't know, man. It feels too manga or anime in a way.
Well, I don't really get a manga. Well, I don't know. There are some dark manga, so I guess I shouldn't say.
I just covered Berserk today. Big old sword. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Ooh. I haven't read Berserk, so
oh my. Maybe, but there's actually a lot of crossover between these two things.
Really? Huh.
But they're arguing with one another, I would say.
Yeah. I also just wanted to go back to when we were talking about Esminette's reunion with Akamian. One, I was so that scene where he says that she's a whore. Like she's once again a whore to him.
A whore after all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
whore after all. Yeah.
God.
There were so many scenes like that were just, that was definitely the most heartbreaking one for me.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's also the scene where Zin goes to save Akamian, and then
Oh.
Akamian doesn't, Akamian's willing to sacrifice him after all of that.
Well, is it Akamian who's willing to sacrifice him, or is it the what's his name inside Akamian?
I think it's very clear that it's the other guy, the older guy whose name I keep forgetting.
Yeah, what's his name, Jimmy?
Seth Watha.
Seswatha. Yeah,
I
Seswatha.
always mess it up.
Sethwatha.
Yeah, we get a lot
Seswatha.
more Seswatha talk, no God talk here too.
Yeah.
I thought Akamian and Zin's relationship in this book was the most tragic. I thought Akamian's relationships in general in this book, Joanna, were
Yeah.
just like the
True.
most
Yeah.
tragic shit. And I thought they were really beautifully written. Like to know where to put that line of dialogue, like whore after all. It just has
Yeah.
a gravitas to it that
Yeah.
could have easily been missed. And that's where, like Philip, you said, you really like his writing. That's kind of me. Like whenever I feel like when he takes the shot, he generally lands in those interpersonal moments pretty well.
Yeah.
I think that the one with Zin or Sanet, that relationship afterwards, when he's coming back with him and he has to face up with the fact that, well, the guy's blind now. Now maybe those kind of things touch me in a different way, but that idea that someone with that sort of disability, whether you're to blame for it or not, that there is suddenly like a feeling of dependency in a way. I think he captured that fairly well, because that's something, if I can be a bit personal here, that's something that for people with disabilities, right? In all your relationships, there is always that thing, that gulf between you, that continuous question of dependency. And he captured that in a very good way. I mean, obviously, he makes it more explicit because Akamian is to blame for at least partly to blame for Zin's blindness in that case, but to actually point out that there is that feeling, and it's a terrible thing because it leads to feelings of guilt on both sides. And he makes that clear, and I appreciated that, because it's rare that people manage to actually point at that.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful.
I loved Zin's character in this. I loved the scenes too, where he's even at the beginning where he's arguing with Proyas on Akami's behalf. And Proyas, actually even before that, when Proyas is trying to get information from, I think it's Proyas who's getting information from Zin about the lessons between Akamian and Kelus.
Yeah.
And Proyas is basically talking about, just he is looking down on, obviously the worldview is against sorcery and sorcerers from his perspective. And I just appreciated how that was handled. I thought it also made me wonder, I put a question mark in my notes. I put, is Proyas maybe jealous of Kelus on some level because Kamian used to be his teacher? That thought crossed my mind. So I don't know. I love the character work in this, by the way. I think that what I really appreciated about the character work, and not excluding all these tragic moments that we're talking about, is the way that you get the perspective of characters from other characters' perspectives. So you see this character from this character's perspective, and then you switch and see it from this other perspective. So I just really liked that. I liked the back and forth perspectives.
Yeah. There were like, he's good at that. He's definitely better with male characters. I still feel that as much as I appreciate what he's trying to do with Esminette, I think he's really failing with what's her name? Survey, definitely.
Well, you won't be seeing her again anyway, so.
Yeah, well, when she's gone up through, but still, I think he's failing there. And I mean, and we had like that one scene with the Emperor, not Canthus, the older one.
Oh,
and his mother again. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
I
the
think
mother watching him have
mother
sex with the slave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You
don't
know?
know. I still feel like of all these maligned female characters, she's getting the rawest deal of the mother of the emperor in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because and I think that's part of the issue that I have with like how he does female characters, because we have that one scene where he basically goes like, yeah, you know what? Men and women are equal. And it's just the system that is basically
That's
fucked.
Calhoun explaining to
Yeah,
Esmond.
yeah. So we have that scene, but at the same time, and this goes beyond that, right? It's like we have the mother of the emperor, the empress mother, or whatever you want to call her, right? And she has basically managed to, claw her way through all these, different levels of sexism in this highly patriarchal world.
Hmm.
But the way she's described is still highly unsympathetic in all kinds of ways. And there's and that's the issue that I have with it. It's like, yeah, she managed to actually, claw out some form of space for her own in there.
I would
But
argue that
she's not exactly she there's a level of malice in the descriptions of her that I personally really find problematic. And then you have Serway, who, well, she's described as fairly simple, intellectually, and that's like, I don't know, it just feels unkind in a way that sort of counteracts what he's trying, what Callus is saying there. And at the end of the day, the only character who is sort of more or less intellectually unlike the level of other characters and gets enough complexity sort of as a character is Esmenet. And all the other female characters are very, very much cardboard cutouts in a lot of ways.
So
And that's something
I
that
would
annoys
just
me.
to that I would and I don't disagree with what you're saying about Serway and the Emperor's mother, but I would also just add that patriarchy has a way of warping men and women in ways that are really don't make people admirable characters. So you could read Serway as the logical result of patriarchy, a person in her position. You could read the Emperor's mother as a logical result of patriarchy, a woman trying in whatever way she can to have power. And that's essentially what she's about. And she used her looks, which is usually in a patriarchy, one of the few avenues that women have
definitely
toward power. And now those looks are gone. And so she's a tragic, sad figure in that respect. So I think, again, what we said last time was, I think we all agreed, Bakker is not being misogynist, he's portraying misogyny. And those characters, I agree with you, are not admirable characters, but that's a result of the circumstances of their society and patriarchy around them.
I mean, that's sort of where I'm uncertain. I can see your argument; it's certainly there. But I feel that there's a level of malice in just the word choice when he talks about the emperor's mother, for example. That just, I'm like, where I'm not sure if it's sort of bordering the thing between like, is this because we most of the time we see her through her son's eyes, and obviously that's warped because he's part of the patriarchy of the system as well. But when we have Serway's inner like self, the level of not understanding is just insane. It's like you have two female characters who's like in a perspective we get, and you choose to make one of them
a dupe.
Very stupid, to make it simple, and very stupid. That's like, if there's like a moment where she realized that, she gets stuff because she's like very good looking and stuff like that, but it's like she falls for Callus immediately because she's kind of simple. I'm like, I don't know, man.
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I honestly think I agree. I think there could have been maybe more with her character than what Bakker did. I think she is much more of a simple character in a lot of ways, but at the same time, she serves a very strong narrative function. And I don't think he considers her a primary character the way he does Esmenet.
Definitely.
Even though she serves a narrative function. So, like, for example, I was looking at A Thousandfold Thought, and at the beginning of these books, he does do
Yeah,
a
like a rap. Yeah, give a
cap of
yeah.
everything. And when he includes the main primary characters, he doesn't include Sarway. So I
Uh-huh.
just don't see her as a primary character, and I think that was part of it. We get her perspective, but it's so little. But I do think he does a lot with Esmenet, and I
Yeah.
actually felt like even though Sarway was maybe a little more simple, I felt like I got a stronger understanding of Esmenet through the contrast between her and Sarway.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
Also,
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Esmenet is pretty, and obviously no one's, we're talking about Sarway, but I would just like to point out the fact that Esmenet is really excellent in a lot of ways because she was actually illiterate and all these other things, and she like taught herself, right? Like she was able to like fairly quickly gather context and be able to hang
Yeah.
with people and really see Akami in a deeper way as well. So like her social perception's very high. And she's kind of slowly building. I think that her character development is actually pretty key in this book. Obviously, Kellis is the main focus of this book, but for me, it's like looking back on it now, like there's almost a we joked earlier about a power creep for Philip, but there's almost a little bit of a power creep for Esmenet because she's learning so quickly whenever she really doesn't have, she never had the tools growing up and in the patriarchy to do so.
Yeah.
So she is in a way still constrained by the patriarchy, but is definitely exceeding expectations for a whore.
And
A good
actually,
example.
even
Sorry.
Yeah.
and even Akamian points out towards the beginning of the book that the way that she reads, he wondered if she could have been a witch. And so that was what I was talking about in our last conversation. Like there was some implication that women could be sorcerers.
Because they have power. Yeah.
And so I guess there was potential there. And I think he saw that. I think Akamian saw her potential. He saw that I think I think that I know he calls her his pillar at one point, and sort of teacher of love is what he refers to her as. But at the same time, he also seems to take her thoughts into consideration quite a bit. Like when she's talking about,
Well, isn't it interesting that it's at the end of the day, it's Kelhus who teaches her to read and not Akamian, who could have done so for a long time.
And that's a really touching scene, even though it's likely that Kelhos was manipulating her even in that moment. But it's just so beautiful how touched she is by the notion that, oh, I'm valuable. I'm worth teaching to read. We also learned something very dark about her, which is the fact that
she sold her daughter.
Her daughter didn't die. She sold her daughter. Which is, again, talk about patriarchy putting women into places where they do things that are terrible.
That scene's rough. Like
that scene is very rough. And I think he does a key thing there when he mentions that, and it's a sentence like she took the thoughts from her father because her father basically sold her. That's why she thought it was okay to sell her daughter.
Oh yeah.
And
passing on of the trauma.
Definitely. That's a very Malazan thing to do.
Yeah. I did feel like I got a strong sense of Esmenet's character, though, even in just little moments, like the way that, she would chide Akamian, the way she would tease him, and the way he described her as like crying without covering her face. And she just seemed to me, I just felt she was very fleshed out for me. Like I felt like she was a very embodied woman, and it was strongly contrasted by Sarway being more like an ingenue kind of character, much more like an innocent, or I don't know, just a meeker character. And you can actually see that Sarway was a bit jealous of Esmenet's quality with that. And awkward. That was kind of awkward, but I kind of like that he embraced the awkwardness there too.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a bunch of things that I found interesting. Okay, there's first, and I have to bring up these things. First of all, you talk about the mastodons, and I love that. And I was like wondering, is there like a rule that forbids fantasy authors to use the word elephant? Because Tolkien uses like Lumakil or Oliphant, and he's like, I can't call these elephants; I have to call them mastodon. And then at the same, and that's the funny thing. At the same time, he calls the Padishah, he calls him like elephantine, and I'm like, dude. In the same paragraph, you talk about mastodons.
Where are these elephants?
Body.
Yeah.
That is so funny.
I usually don't want to, do these like, immersion breaking arguments about using words that don't make sense. I don't care about that, but it was just like funny. It's like mastodons, but his body is not mastodon like, it's elephantine. I'm like, do they have elephants and mastodons? What's
Macedonian.
Macedonian? Yeah. It was just like funny, but it's on the other hand, it felt unnecessary to me.
Mhm.
That you have the Padishah, the basically leader of the Muslim equivalent in this world, and he dies, right? He gets killed immediately. So
Yeah.
there's no need to why is he describing that guy as well, at one point he describes him like his whale-like belly, and at the same
Yeah.
time, why do you choose to make your Muslim equivalent obese? Why do you do that when there's like no need later on, because the character just shows up twice? That's something that just like irked me. And then I started thinking, I was like, so why is Kelhus this like idealized Aryan at the same time? It's like, why does our like Ubermensch always come from the north and is always blonde and almost white blonde and strong and whatnot? It's like, I don't know, man. It just
Well,
I just like I just felt like he's falling back on like very basic ideas here that kind of annoyed me, because that that effeminate elephantine whatever feeling of the ruler of the Muslims. There's like, I don't know, man. You should be aware of the fact that that's sort of like very cliched in a lot of ways.
I don't have a defense for that, but I do want to talk a little bit more about the mastodons and other things that I really admire in here, like his use of magic. I like how Baker goes for it at certain points, because the mastodons is like, whoa, okay, that's cool, that's epic. I feel the same way about the magic. I really, really love Baker's magic systems here. And he gives these sorcerers or you don't want to be a wizard because you don't have a school if you're a wizard, right? So I guess the sorcerers or whatever are the ones in the schools. And holy cow, is it ever cool what they can do? They're so overpowered though that he has to come up with something, and I think he's brilliant with this, that limits them, and that's the Korai, or the God's Tears. So they have their limitations, and of course I think he does a great job with the consequences. Like Akamian is haunted by these horrible nightmares every night. That's the deal. Okay, you're a mandate schoolman, you have access to the gnosis, but it kind of sucks, right? Because you have these awful nightmares every night.
Yeah, it certainly comes at a cost. But something that I was wondering about is like, almost all of the magic that we see in these books, and of course it's because there's war going on, but almost all of the magic is offensive. It's all like destructive magic. Like they blow up shit all the time, but we never see like healing magic. There's very little other stuff, like as someone who's played enough D&D, like he's only got like the evocation stuff.
There's no healing magic, otherwise we would have seen
there's no healing magic, there's no divination magic, there's no I guess the only other thing that we learn is that Akka can apparently jump into like the spirit world and walk there and just like hide from people, and they can create light.
In shadows or whatever. Yeah,
he can walk in this like a hidden way, and people can create light, but beyond that all they can do is blow up shit. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. If I could do magic, I would blow up shit all the time, but it's interesting that it's all military.
Yeah. Well, and in a society like that makes sense. I mean, look at here. I live in a country, and so does Jimmy and Joanna, where
we live in a society.
How much money do we spend? How much money do we spend on our military? It's similar, I think, in the sense that if you have this tremendous resource, magic, and the way that society is, it's very militaristic, it's very violent. You're going to use your magic for destructive ends most of the time. That makes sense, I think.
A lot of technological pushes also have come from the need of it to kill people with it, and then they're like, all right, Apple.
I just found it interesting when I read it. It's like, we see those people only blowing up stuff, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
The Kore block sorcery and are like mini black holes, which I thought was pretty dope. And it says that
Yeah.
it affects the way the sorcerer sees like the waves. And there was the other piece. It's kind of magic related, and it's also really interesting because it's the first time we get confirmation that demons exist. But if you summon a demon, you are bound to eternal torture by that demon in the afterlife, which confirms that there's afterlife
Yeah.
and that there's demons.
Yeah.
And
And
Mengeta,
another consequence to magic too.
Yeah.
yeah, and Mengeta is this historical place where the No God fought, and it's weird. Like there's some weirdness happening on Battle of Mengeta. What about Saban's chapter where he sees his own death?
I feel like for me, the way I read it was like sort of maybe I've read too much, stuff like Terry Pratchett and stuff. But it feels like there's like the fabric of the universe is worn thin in a way on the battlefield of Mengeta. Well, I always want to say
Yes.
Megiddo, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's where the name comes from,
That's
of
right.
course. But it feels like the fabric of the universe is worn thin, and things can come through.
Yep. That's exactly it.
I do like that. It's cool. It kind of lends the whole world this sort of cosmic horror vibe, this almost Lovecraftian cosmic horror vibe, which obviously the face, the skin spies also have, because tentacles.
I love how you do that, Philip, because I think I do the same thing in my head too when I think of those things. Yeah.
Joanna, you were talking about kind of like heart-crushing moments in the Battle of Mengeta, whenever I think it's Kusalt is Saban's servant, like man.
Oh
servant.
yeah.
Whenever he says, "I would have you know how much I hated you," and
Yeah.
Saban is like, "What? Like you hated me?" And it's like this moment, like I actually like kind of got crushed in that moment because Saban had no idea that he was hated. Like I don't know, it was a really weird moment.
He
but
strikes
Saban
me
does-
as
it was interesting to me. I wish he had built up that thing earlier, because we only
Yeah.
see this guy once before, so I didn't care much about him. Like, if
Yeah.
I see the point that he's trying to make, but I wish
I
it
would
would have
agree
been
with that.
built up better.
But it does contribute to Salbin's character, which I
Yeah.
think is something that he's doing something interesting with, the fact that he has this ambition to be a
Yeah.
king, because he's not in line for the throne of his own place, and he's he's a prince, but he's a landless prince. He doesn't rule. His one
Yeah.
Kelha sees it, right? He reads the guide like he does everyone else.
I feel it's
like
sort
a
of
book.
inspired. I feel it's sort of inspired by Count Baldwin of Flanders, who
Yeah, yeah.
was one of those guys during the First Crusade who exclusively went there to become king.
Yep.
Sort of, and ended up being king.
Yeah, he did all right, I guess. Yeah. So yeah,
Depends on
but
what you mean by all right, but yeah.
True. Yeah.
One other thing, and I'm still working out these things. Well, I guess we need to wait for like the next book, at least, possibly more of those books. What do you think about the skin spies and the consult? Basically, and I assume what they're doing is manipulating all sides to create this worldview. Like, from what I've seen so far, their goal is basically to kill everyone and take over the world and kill everyone and make the place like empty.
Yeah.
Sort of.
That
I think
seems to be the motive. Yeah.
I think, like,
Although,
a world-
Jimmy, I have a point of clarification, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
So the non-men,
Yes.
I thought from the first book, I thought they were just baddies that were like the skin spies and others and so forth. But Acadian tells this whole story about how the non-men were the inhabitants of this
I think
place.
basically just elves.
Before they like elves, I think. I'm taking them as elves. Like, you're right, Raph.
Some Bakerites
So-
are going to be very mad if you say that. I said that in my video because I said, "Oh yeah, so they're basically elves," and people are like, huh, "Just elves," they're not.
Okay,
They're sort of they're sort
Baker's
of
spin
between-
on elves, then
Yes,
fine.
and they're
sort of-
cool. They have a lot of history. There's a Radix, which is really interesting.
But they
and-
are in league at the end. They are in league with the Inkorai and the
shrank.
yeah, they're in league with them. They're there. They're present in that little like post.
At least some of them are.
There are okay. Some of them are present there, and
Yeah. I think for me, they're sort of between elves and ancient aliens, I guess.
Well, the non-men, are one of the really native inhabitants of Urwa, right? So
Yeah.
like
Right.
they are very, they're native to this place, and they're ancient people, and you get a lot more non-men stuff in the sequel series.
Okay.
But Roth has it right. Some were there, so maybe some
Right.
others wouldn't be.
Because in ancient times, they're the ones who taught the human invaders
That's right.
magic
That's right.
in order to fight the Inkorai and so forth at
Mm.
Golgotharoth or whatever.
Golgotha Roth. Oh
Yeah.
man.
Golgotha.
What-
Oh no,
No,
Golgotha.
it's
is
a
Dunyain?
mix. It's a mix of Golgotha and Gorgoroth, which I kind of like as a wordplay.
It sounds cool. I mean, that's the only thing I really know. It sounds dope. Like whenever they say, "What is Dunyain in the shadow of Golgotha Wrath?" and you're like, "Holy shit!" Like that sounds intense.
Definitely.
He has
But
a good way of
that
using
I do
words,
feel
like-
I do feel kind of pissed off at like sometimes Baker is just too on the nose for me, right? It's like you have Kelhus, who's sort of Paul Atreides, right? And you call those guys who can do the whole Bene Gesserit thing, you call them Dune-Ain? Are you sure, man?
But I like Paul and I don't like Kellis. I think there's a big difference where Paul is a kid who's learning how to survive. And yeah, he does end up in a position of great power, but I feel like he's not deliberately out there manipulating people for what end too. He's like, Daddy, I'm coming. I don't know what I'm doing, but
I
I'm
think
coming.
that's the interesting question, right? It's like because we've been talking so much about free will, and my question last time was like, does Kellis have free will? And we still don't know because we don't know what the fuck he's actually trying to do.
He doesn't know. He doesn't know.
He doesn't care. He's just like, I'll just do it. We'll see. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and he goes through the circumfiction, and it's a massive thing, and he visits the outside.
Mhm.
He
So,
has the
like-
thousandfold thought.
So what do you make? I mean, has he lost his mind?
I don't think so. I
Did
think
he
it's more
have
like
it in the first place?
I think it's more like a breakthrough that is sort of important, right? It's more like a final breakthrough to actually, leave all the bonds of like I don't want to say the flesh because he's already sort of beyond that, but like he has this like I think it's more like a breakthrough moment in a lot of ways. At least that's how I read it.
Yeah.
So, am I remembering right? Was Kellis able to? Did I imagine this? Was Kellis able to communicate with Nair in his mind?
Yes, at least Nair thinks so.
Okay, but we don't know if
Yes.
that's real.
And he's not the only one. As Menet hears him speaking in
true.
her mind, Sarway does. So he's able apparently to telepathically communicate with people.
So
Hmm.
this is one of those things where he is playing with the bicameral. I feel pretty confident saying this.
Yeah.
He's playing with the bicameral mind. He's playing with the idea that consciousness maybe is still developing in Urwa at this moment,
Yeah.
and that what we hear and what we experience could also just be the other side of our brain.
Yeah.
And it's messing with
I read
like,
it as that, like them just imagining him talking to them.
yeah. So it's like, how conscious is Naor? That's it. That's like the next question. It's really trippy shit, and it like this will continue. Like it gets deeper.
Well,
and it's
clearly
really-
Nair is suppressing a lot.
A
So
lot.
there's the very strong implication, or it's pretty actually explicit that he
It's
had
good.
a relationship with Kellis's father, a sexual relationship.
Yeah.
And that is something that haunts him. And he's very insecure with his sexuality. Let's put it that way. He seems to be attracted to Proyas as well, I would say. That seems pretty, that there is a sexual tension there between
Yeah.
Nair and Proyas.
Yeah.
And Nair's in just a whole heap load of denial about a lot of that. But he also, interestingly, seems to be more and more aware of how Kelhus manipulated him through Sarway. Like Sarway was, and this is awful, honestly, on Kelhus's part, but Sarway was just an object that he used to get Nair to do what he wanted.
Yeah.
That's clear, right?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely. I mean, you, Jimmy, and I have read the bicameral mind book, I guess.
I haven't read it. I've only listened to essays on it. I plan to read it in the future.
Okay, no, I read it a couple of months ago, and that's sort of the point, right? It's like
Sorry,
people.
can you explain the bicameral mind?
What?
Do you mind explaining what the bicameral mind?
Okay, so there's a book, and it's not a theory that a lot of people actually subscribe to. I think
Right.
that's important to understand.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
this guy called Julian Jaynes. I think it's
Yes,
Julian.
that's correct.
Julian Jaynes, a professor, and he wrote this book, the Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. It's from the 70s, and while it may not be true, a lot of authors have read it and found it very inspirational. Those are Stephen Erickson, Neil Stevenson, and definitely R. Scott Bakker. And the theory that Jaynes proposes is that our two brain halves of our brain weren't always as connected as they are now. And the idea behind that is that for a lot of long time, and I may confuse the brain halves there because I'm not quite. So our speech center is in one of our halves, and the other side, so creative thinking, it happens in the other half. And his idea is that up to a point, until our brain halves were more like better connected, stuff that happened in our creative side of our brain was transmitted through the same connections that basically are our auditory nerves. So we actually heard voices in those situations where we did creative thinking.
The voice of God. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the idea. And he bases that on his reading of the Iliad.
I heard
Because-
Stephen Erickson talk about this before. Okay.
Erickson loves that book.
Yeah, he does.
And that's the point. He takes that, and I think, and Neil Stevenson definitely quotes it as an inspiration for Snow Crash once again, where he goes into the same direction. I'm almost certain that Terry Pratchett read it before he wrote Small Gods as well. That idea that the voices that we hear in our brain are actually, the voices that we hear as gods, we actually perceive them as actual godlike voices, but it's our own brain talking to us, basically.
So it's basically the premise is that the corpus callosum, which is that bunch of nerve fibers that connect the two halves of the brain, was less developed in former times.
Exactly. And over time, it basically became more like that. And then we needed more and more elaborate techniques to actually still hear the voice of gods, which is why you have all these rites in, say, Delphi or whatnot, where people take all kinds of drugs to still hear the voice of the god. And he backs that up at the time with a lot of research on people that can hear voices and how that often happens in crisis situations. And I think that's sort of what you can see with someone like Mayer, where you have that situation. They hear, like he hears the voice of Kelhus in an absolute crisis situations. Normally he doesn't hear him. He hear the godlike voice. Normally he just does, what we would call thinking and creative thinking. But in those situations, in those extreme situations, that's when he still hears a divine voice, so to speak. And I think that's what you can take from the bicameral mind theory there.
It makes sense that a lot of authors would be attracted to this theory, because I think a lot of authors
it is cool
feel like there is a voice telling them to write this story, that the story has this voice, this inspiration.
I don't even know that, because I'm not a writer. I just read that book and I'm like, wow, that's cool. You can build a lot from it. It's
you can even take it to the macro.
There's these kind of theories that you read at nonfiction, like those grand theories, and even if it's wrong, you can do a lot of fun world building and story building from that idea. And I think that's sort of what Jaynes kind of falls into, as far as I can tell. But I'm not an evolutionary biologist, which is what Jaynes was, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know how out there the whole thing is that he's doing.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd ever be able to get evidence for it, because brains are pretty soft tissue, and so we don't really have preserved brains from 10,000 years.
That's the point. I mean, he builds this thing through the Iliad, where in the Iliad you can only have you have people gods talking to people, and he used specific words for that. And then he looks at the Odyssey and says, like, in the Odyssey, it's sort of gone, and people are actually thinking in the Odyssey. So he takes that, point where people shifted around between the Iliad and the Odyssey. So around, I don't know what's
really
that
interesting.
It's a fun book to read. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting how we come up with all these other topics while talking about Bakker's books?
Yeah, that's really cool.
That's what I've enjoyed.
Yeah.
If
I like
it's a
it.
lot
I
like
like
Blood Meridian in a way. Blood Meridian made me want to read a ton of nonfiction books.
Yeah.
And Joanna is reading that at a slow pace with me. I'm rereading it right now because I read it
Blood
last
Meridian
month.
is a fantastic book. I love that book. I mean, love is maybe the wrong word, but it's probably the bleakest thing I've ever read.
It's excellent. And
so well
Fantastic.
written.
Baker does his own
Yeah.
Blood Meridian and Aspect Emperor in a way.
And
I would
and
be
the
very-
opening of the Thousandfold Thought opens with a Blood Meridian quote, and it
Yes.
is so.
Ah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. So that's pretty clear then.
Yeah. And so as far as the Thousandfold Thought, so what's the relationship between that and the bicameral mind? Because I'm not sure I get that connection.
Well, so
I don't know. He just mentions the thousandfold thought at
Yeah.
the end of the book.
We
So
don't
I
know
have
what
no
it is
idea what
yet.
that is.
Jimmy
Well,
might
mine-
know more.
My interpretation, and Jimmy, you can let me know if I'm wrong. My interpretation of that was that once he survives basically being crucified or whatever, when he's taken down, and people suddenly worship him again. It's like he gains back his worship, and people, I don't know, I had this visual of people bowing before him, and I was thinking thousandfold thought, like people, thousands of people bowing,
Oh wow.
and all one thought. I don't know.
Wow. I've never heard anyone interpret it like that, but that's honestly as good as anything I could ever tell you. And I can't tell you guys anything because
I was-
you
I
got to
was-
read the third book.
I was wondering how much of that scene of like him, going out there, seeing all this stuff and coming back, how much of that is like what you might call ego death in like psychedelic experiences.
Mm.
By the way,
it feels a lot like that. And I'm not an expert because I've never done psychedelics, but
Oh, it's a shame.
the term I believe
I know.
is not crucified, but circumfied. Not circumcised.
Yeah, so it's between circumcision and crucifixion. It's
somewhere in the middle.
Circumfied.
it's a doozy. All right.
Yeah.
It's a doozy, guys.
Yeah, because they tie them to the rings to this ring so he can actually
Right. Well, that's where they get the circumfix afterwards.
I can tell you guys this: Mengetta and the circumfixion are two things that you will have to continue to reinterpret and to think about. And I have finished the series, and I still think today I was rereading the circumfixion, and I'm like, like why?
Circumfixion.
As I said, like it definitely gave me the vibes of like ego death and seeing the universe in a different way.
Yeah, that was what I kind of had a feeling about that too. Yeah.
I just feel like he could have just taken some shrooms and would have been easier.
He did say that
yeah, he did.
Baker said that all good fantasy is derived from smoking a bunch of pot when you're 16.
Yeah.
So it's like, how did you come up with your ideas? And he's like everyone else, I just smoked a bunch of reefer.
Yeah, well, there's certainly that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of trippy stuff to think about in these books.
There is.
I'm still worried though. And that's maybe because of like all kinds of other things, but I'm still kind of worried about the consult being these hidden like puppet masters that are hiding in plain sight and playing all these sides against each other. But I'm keeping my judgment until we actually have proof that they're also, manipulating the Muslim equivalent whose name the Phanim. That's a word.
Phanim, yeah.
And until we have proof that they're also doing that, I feel they're doing that, but I'm not quite sure yet. And at that point, I have issues if that's the case.
Yeah.
I can't
Great.
really
Do we have
say.
any final closing thoughts for the discussion?
It'll be interesting to see.
We managed to completely not talk about the sexuality thing that Philip brought up at the beginning.
Oh, sorry. We can talk about that.
Yeah, there is that.
I'm not trying to shut down the conversation. I just thought,
No. Yeah.
I just realized we didn't talk about it, and I think it's important because we kind of scratched it the last time, and I think we should definitely bring it back up. And since you were the first to bring it up, Philip, what's your issue?
Okay. Yeah.
I think I share it.
It's a slightly awkward thing to bring up, but the fact of the matter is that in the first two books, I feel like there's a very clear association between the consult and their creatures and a kind of sexual energy. Like he's giving us these monstrous beings, and they seem to get, they're very horny, right? I mean,
The
they just
race
they
of lovers.
love they
A
they.
race of lovers, as he said.
But
at
the
the
thing
end.
is, for them, there's this equation between violence and sex. What turns them
Yeah.
on is violence. That's clear. Like you
Yeah.
have many examples of one of the skin changers, particularly Sarcellus, having a massive erection because of the thought of doing violence or doing
definitely.
violence.
I really like, I don't know if I should say like is the right word, but I found it interesting the way his prose changed around that. Like he uses much more vulgar word usage, and that he goes from kind of an archaic style to vulgar modern word
I
usage.
don't think I will ever be able to eat a peach again.
Yes, I live in the state of the peach, and I was thinking that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, that's just peachy, isn't it?
For a moment, I was going to say you live in Virginia, but I'm trying to not.
Oh,
Yeah.
No, but like I know what you mean.
So I'm
those
just
change.
a little bit, I'm wondering, where are we going with this? This equation between violence and sex, and the fact that, and I'm still not totally sure I like what happened in the first book with Esmenet being essentially raped, but really loving it, apparently.
And he comes back to that. And that's
Serway, it happens to Serway in the second book. So it just seems kind of like
And at the end,
a bit like pornography, honestly. And at the end, that thing. So there's an element to this that I worry is voyeuristic and pornographic.
I'm not sure if it's pornographic, but I think my issue there is exactly that. He's talking, not to put too fine a point on it, he's talking about rape, very explicit rape. And I can see the idea of in the kind of society that he's building and so forth, that sexuality is very much, and rape in general in war and so forth, is about like domination and power.
Yeah,
so
humans are animals. We're animals, and sex is all about violence and domination. That's
I personally disagree, but I can see how that fits into the world that he's building there. So I'm fine with that. I have the issue exactly with the fact that apparently the women, and it's only the women in those regards, because so far it's only been like violence against women, which is, a thing, apparently, that while they're obviously being raped and they're aware of it, they still love it. And I don't know, man. Like even beyond the pornographic, that's something you should probably not touch, because it, there's all kinds of connotations there that I personally really hate, which go into like this idea that that there is an element to like masculine prowess that if you're just good enough or whatever, people cannot just like resist you. And there's like all kinds of arguments there that go into like all kinds of like more like homophobia and whatnot, when you have these ideas like back in the day when all these ideas like that say lesbians are people that have never, and so forth. And he kind of touches on that when he goes into like, it's obviously violation, but they're also kind of liking it. And I'm like, man, you could have just like not done that, because it doesn't serve anything.
The voice at the end, in the very end, says that we are a race of lovers.
Yeah.
And so I do have to say that I could see taking issue with associating lovers and sexual rape, and mixing these things together can be very icky. That was honestly what turned me away from Kashiel's Dart, which is a book that's very popular, and I never finished it, but I got into it. But the whole like sexual violence, it felt like glorified in a way, like women were liking being treated in that way, and it just didn't sit well with me personally. But the race of lovers, I thought that was, I don't know, Jimmy, do you have thoughts about that? A race of lovers, what is meant by that?
Yeah, I mean the Inkurai are. I mean, I don't know how much is in here. Like, what do you guys know about the Inkuroi before I say anything?
Basically nothing.
Okay.
There's a story that Akamian tells like everyone when he's like, yeah, the no man fought but against the Inkurai and they built all this shit
Yeah.
and that's that. And
We know they
then
hang out at Golgotha, and we know that the little guy with the bird, the little birdie with the human head is one of them, I think, right?
no,
Should
he's
be.
still a construct.
Aha.
The little birdie is still a construct, but the face is the face of the general of the no god.
He's one of the old fathers or whatever, right?
Yeah. Well,
No,
yeah,
he's not.
I can
He's
say
not.
that
He's not one of them. He's just built after it.
the Inkuroi are definitely part, like, in cohesion with the consult.
Yeah,
The
and
consult is made up of more than Inkurai.
Aren't there humans who sided with the Inkurai that are part of?
That is correct. There
Yeah.
are. And
the
on then-
Skilvendi, didn't they? I mean, as far as I know, the Skilvendi like sided with the no god.
Yeah, I
Well,
can't.
some of them
I-
fight on his team, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
I
Yeah.
can't remember if all the tribes from the plane are on the Inkuroi side. I feel like I could tell you guys about the Inkuroi because I don't know if Bakker tells you about the Inkuroi and even now. Like, I think you can finish the whole series and not know. So part of me wants to say what they are, but then there's a part of me that doesn't. So I think I'll wait until the next book. But a race of lovers, meaning that they are, of a different race, right?
Yeah.
So is it totally feasible that these are way more, maybe not even primitive is the right word, but just evolved in a different manner? Where violence and sexuality is mixed.
Yeah.
There's more to find out, I think, with that stuff. What I will say about the comments and stuff, like, obviously there's some really problematic stuff when it comes to portraying assault and people getting enjoyment out of it. I think that's like a really crazy thing to put on a piece of paper. I think that's pretty wild. What I would say is that I don't necessarily, and this is, Joanna, to your point when Kushiel started, you said that you felt like there was some glorification around it. I never felt as if the assault, even with the portrayal of like the enjoyment or whatever, I still didn't actually feel as if it was being supported as much as it was being shown as very problematic. And one thing that I have seen some people comment on, this is not from R. Scott Bakker himself, but people on forums and such that are discussing this at a high level, is that they believe that maybe some of that enjoyment that he is displaying is actually also a commentary on the society and the patriarchy in which they live. Can a society shape sexual desire and pleasure and guilt in these things? Guy Gavriel actually he plays with this in a very different way, but he has very horny books, as everyone always says, makes jokes about. But the reason why Guy Gavriel actually includes sex in his books is because he believes that society shapes the way that people engage in sexual behaviors, and that you can actually withdraw a lot about not just the person, but the society and the way that they engage in these, rituals, for lack of a better term. And so for one of the more interesting things I saw was the fact that this is a further commentary on Irma and the society here of the three C's. Now, with that said, I don't necessarily know if it's needed or if it is even well executed, but that's just
sort of the
something I've
point.
seen.
I think you can try that, but that sounds like an awful lot of heavy lifting on like the side of the interpreter, and I'm not sure. I just feel like it's too close to like she wanted it to, didn't she? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't make me feel very good.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily enjoy,
I think that's the challenge, is like, are we meant to appreciate, like, enjoy that, or are we meant to be like,
I think
because
we're
I
definitely
think
meant to
that's where I can be okay with it in a way, is if we're not meant to be, if we're meant to be critical of it, if we're meant to be uncomfortable with it.
I think it's a little more jarring whenever
it's definitely
like,
uncomfortable.
I mean, I think it's a little more jarring when it's like a world that is like full of like the typical fantasy, like here is the coming of age hero, and like then they try to sprinkle some of this stuff
with like a
in.
focus on coming, I guess.
Yeah. Whatever, man. So like, I almost feel like it's more jarring when that happens in like a traditional fantasy story or something like this, whereas in Irwa, maybe I do give it leeway because I expect terribleness from every scene.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I think like the issue that I have with it is the way. So there's like these two scenes, right? There's the one with Esmenet in book 1, and there's the scene with Survey in this one.
Yeah.
And each time, it does not start out as non-consensual. Like they're basically tricked into it, right?
Mhm.
In the first book, like in book 1, Esmenet, the guy Sarsalas I think it's Sarsalas. He walks in.
First it's Sarsalas's boss, right?
Right, it's Sarsalas's boss, and he walks in, and she's a prostitute. He pays her, and then he does the thing, and through his magic dick powers, he makes her so compliant that she tells him everything. And in this book, the Sarsalas thing takes on the shape of Kellis and walks in on Survey. And once again, through his, and that's the thing that annoys me so much about it, is it's what happens is non-consensual sex because it happens under false pretenses.
Mhm.
But it's apparently so good that she can't help herself but actually talk and give him all the information. And that's the thing that annoys me so much about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a weird thing too, because the Inquiri are not human, right? And they're not. There's like I can't say all the details. I don't think necessarily that the further scope that that you'll end up having is going to change the fact that this is a bit of a messy thing.
And if we look at it, looking at the Sarsalas thing, it's actually a construct. So basically, he's just a tentacle sex doll, which I don't know, man.
It's different.
I wouldn't know. I don't have one.
I think there's definitely like a lot of really messy stuff, and one of the things that's really hard with this series, especially as we continue on, is like there's some really wacky, interesting world building and lore that I personally love. Like I think it is so ridiculous, like some of the stuff that he goes for, but then you have to wonder like what is playing into the thematic value of it, and then what is just simply lore. You know what I mean? Like, is the race of lovers really supposed to mean much more other than the fact that, there are race of lovers that might literally have been like evolved to use, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't really know what he's trying to say. I gave you one example, but I do agree that it requires some pretty heavy lifting on the side of the reader. So I'm not sure. The one thing I will say is I do think that there is some commentary that maybe like the over sexualization of society or a race or whatever it might be is a bad thing. I think that he's definitely leaning into that, and I have seen him make comments before, like in engaging people who are criticizing his works, talking about he does not enjoy the fact that pornography is so readily available in these things. Like he's like basically saying that like that is one way that you degrade a society, is to make like these things readily available. So I don't know if that's also maybe something he's playing with.
Maybe. One thing that I definitely need to find out at some point is what the fuck is the nail of heaven?
I was wondering the same thing.
Because is it just a poetic name for like the pole star?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, it's the North Star of that
Oh,
world.
Are you sure?
No.
Are you?
I felt really dumb
Because the stars all go around the nail of heaven, right?
Well, what else would? Okay, well, we'll go here. What else would make things circle around it in space?
A black hole.
Interesting.
A black hole, definitely.
I'm
not sure if a black hole would be visible.
Oh, they're all screwed, aren't they? Yeah, by the nail of heaven.
Well, what else?
They're all going to get screwed by the nail of heaven.
Well, they just accomplished this in a simulation in a quantum computer. It's a little shady the way they presented it this week, but they were able to get a wormhole put into a quantum computer, which is a little interesting.
Oh.
Things would also circle around a wormhole, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they'd go from one end to the other, wouldn't they?
So
depends if they enter it.
Yeah.
Oh wow!
I'm telling you, this series is so ridiculous. Like,
wow.
Well, my mind is going back to: are you referring to the previous timeline with Sarah and what's happening in the past, happening in the present?
All I'm saying is the nail of heaven is not a North Star. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
The nail of heaven.
Yeah.
So
I was wondering though. I almost messaged you, Jimmy. I asked, "What the heck is this?" Because it keeps coming up, and I feel like
that's what he's bringing up, the nail of heaven, and it seems to be important in the future.
Yeah.
There
I
is
still,
a lot going on.
I still cannot get over the race of lovers with magic dick powers.
Where could they have come from? Who knows?
Well, I
The
mean, if it's
wormhole.
Oh, man.
yeah, I mean that's sort of the problem, isn't it? It's like if it's a wormhole, they might, and since they're a race of lovers, they might have penetrated the wormhole.
There's a lot of symbolism here, guys. A lot of phallic symbolism.
I feel like we might be degenerating a little bit here.
Oh, goodness.
I
That's
think
always the fun
I
part.
think it was a degenerate before we even started, but you know what I mean. Yeah. No, I did enjoy this one. I think I did enjoy it more than the first one in a lot of ways.
I
I
did.
felt the scene with the Nansur Emperor and his mother was just like unnecessary because it didn't actually lead anywhere.
The Mother's Day brunch.
What? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that thing. It just didn't lead anywhere, and I'm like, why are you including this?
It's pretty rough. Yeah, that one I don't have
Oh,
anything to
yeah,
say
that's
about.
so
It's just
awful.
really disgusting. It's just-
It was. It was.
Like, I mean, as I said, like my point is, it didn't actually provide anything for the plot of the book at this point. I'm like, why are you including this unless you just want to drive home that apparently your pseudo-Byzantine have a fucked up family life? Is it like because you're writing this in 2004 and this is like post Game of Thrones era, so you know that you have to put some incest in there?
Did do a tour with George Martin in like, I don't remember where he was. India, maybe? I don't know. I watched them. They did a press tour together. It was really interesting.
Okay.
I think the only thing we didn't really talk about a lot, I mean, there's probably a ton, but Nair, I kind of think we could have talked a little more about Nair, but
Nair is a fascinating character.
yeah.
I love the hyper masculine yet very emotional, and then shows like a feminine side, and is obviously having non-heterosexual relationships with people. Like he is honestly, I think he's incredibly interesting. And the third book is very Naor heavy in at least for me. Like, and when I reflect on it,
I hope so.
I
think
hope that you guys enjoy where all that ends up.
I was really hoping that when we have that scene with Nair after the battle, where he's sort of boss of the battle, and we have that scene afterwards, and Kellos comes to him to kill Nair, then he just grabs him, and I'm like, I was so hoping this would end up in gay sex. Unfortunately, it didn't.
Been on some level hoping that too, but yeah,
it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility in this series.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I've just read the Still Remains too much.
All right. Well, I guess we are at closing time. So any final thought you want to share about this book? We'll start with Philip.
Final thought is I'm, as I said in the beginning, very impressed with Bakker's storytelling ability, and I'm very intrigued to see where he goes in the Thousandfold Thought. And just I don't feel like I can predict necessarily where he's going, which is a good thing. You know, he's got my respect and my interest, and I will probably wait a bit to read Bakker again, just because I'm not super thrilled by how depressing the stories can be, but I definitely want to finish reading the second Apocalypse series. So I'm that invested. So I'm very impressed, as I imagined I would be when we started. So
Fantastic. And Jimmy, any final thoughts?
Will we grasp the Thousandfold Thought by the end? Who knows? Philip, have you read Blood Meridian?
No, I've only read The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's a shame. You should definitely go and read Blood Meridian.
I recommend it already, and I'm not very far in.
I've read it 3 times by now, and it's super impressive.
Yeah, it might be the best book I've ever read. And my pitch for Aspect Emperor is that Bakker does Blood Meridian in another way and leans like really heavy into metaphysics, which is really cool. So even if
who's the judge?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just excited. I'm excited to see where this ends up. I think Naor is a really good and important character to talk about, and I think we
Mhm.
definitely need to make sure we give him spotlight with the third book
Yeah.
because some of the stuff that ends up going down is like pretty monumental for the whole series.
Mhm.
And I thought this was a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Yay,
Thanks for
thank
having me,
you.
Joanna.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. And Ralph, last thoughts?
Yeah, as I said, I think I liked it more than the first one. I
Mhm.
enjoyed it. It gave me there's stuff I'm still, struggling with, but then again, there's very few books that I don't struggle with. So no, I'm
Yeah,
glad I read it, is what I can say, and I enjoyed the conversation very much.
fantastic. See, so did I. I feel the same way. I really enjoyed this. Enjoy is always a weird word with Baker, but I'm really glad I read this. I felt like I got a lot out of it. And I actually read this now a few weeks ago, but I just revisited my notes on it in preparation for this discussion. And I got excited about so many things all over again. So I'm also very impressed with Baker's storytelling, as Philip said. And I'm very excited, especially with what Jimmy has shared with where we're going next. So thank you all for a fantastic discussion, and thank you all for joining us. And have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Yeah.